I am recording now, so whenever you are ready.
Fantastic. Everyone gulp.
You missed all of those
that gold.
gems.
Yeah, it's, as always.
Gulp, throat, gulp.
Welcome to the Ancient Robot Games podcast. As always, I am Dougal.
I'm Gelb.
And we are joined today by the illustrious legend of the industry, Andy Law, man of many games, many hats. And yeah, welcome, Andy.
Thank you very much for having me. I only have one hat on today, I apologise to say. I could have worn others, but today I just have a nice...
It is a beanie.
It's a beanie.
Yeah,
It can.
exactly.
It's still a decent hat, I think. Not the best hat I've seen you wear.
I was, last time I was here, I was wearing an N7 hat from Mass Effect, but today it's just a relatively plain beanie of grey.
It's
Matching the weather outside, yeah.
Yeah, no, for sure. Would you like to introduce yourself a little bit to our listeners and why we may have invited you today, apart from the massive financial kickback?
Oh, so I can't mention that.
No. Keep that one,
so-
obviously.
Right,
Scrap it,
so
Ryan.
I've no idea why I'm here if it's not for that. All right. So my name is Andy Law. I have been in the games industry since I was a teenager, and I have done almost every job you can do, right from the very ground up to the very top. I'm currently the CEO of Rookery Publications, and we publish our own games, obviously. I also freelance for a variety of different people, often doing troubleshooting or helping people through with their game design if there's issues. I'm most famously known for doing things like the mapping for Critical Role, or designing Warhammer Fantasy Roleplaying, the most recent edition, or just generally working on almost everything at some point in the past. I've done everything from computer game D&D conversions to publications to helping people with Kickstarters to let's just stop. You get the idea. I've been around the bush a few times and worn many hats, even though today it is just simply a beanie. I'd like to imagine myself as someone with a large pile of teetering hats, perhaps a Stetson off towards the side, and maybe a little Santa Claus hat on the top.
No one can actually see this, but he's actually grabbing hats and stacking them on as we speak. So
It's a delight. It is Jenga with hats.
yes.
You say that you've done this since you were a teenager, so what, about 6 years now? Very youthful.
On that, I was organising a slide for one of the actual plays that I do online, and it was a picture of me from a year ago. Just a year ago, I would like to make that nice and clear. And the difference between the Andy of last year and the Andy of this year was stark. One had a lovely, glorious, mostly, not quite entirely, ginger beard. The other one had, let's generously call it, a blonde-looking beard. And I looked at the two and went, holy crap, you can tell I'm about to be 50.
So what happened in the past year? What has driven you to this more
Interacted with me a lot.
elegant,
It's
bolder
Gelb,
thing?
mostly.
Is it Gelb? I mean, it's done it for all of us, for sure.
Sorry, not sorry.
I think it's just that terrifying 50th arriving and everything that it does, because I find my job in general is entirely stress-free. I choose the jobs that I do. I'm very careful to make sure that I'm only doing things I like. I've made mistakes in the past, and I don't want to repeat those mistakes. So because of that, I try to ensure that I've got the most stress-free life that I can possibly have. And broadly, that's worked. It's been great. I love my life.
That's absolutely amazing and wonderful to hear in an industry that is
Horrendous. I mean,
relatively stressful, shall we say. Yes, no, I am with you. So you've worked on loads of stuff. I mean, most recently, Dark Deeds came out, which is a fantastic board game if people haven't played it yet.
Yep.
It is truly amazing. You are all horrible people mugging bystanders and citizens and trying to sneak past guards or attack them, as the case may be, and dealing with nemesis as they go through, trying to be the richest / nastiest person on the board.
Yeah.
It's really, really good fun. Having worked in board games, in miniature gaming, in art and everything else like that, you're doing a lot of RPG stuff as well.
Yeah.
Do you have a preference when it comes to gaming style of RPGs or miniatures games or board games?
I find they're all quite different. RPG for me tends to be a far longer, prolonged job. There's obviously a lot more writing involved, particularly when you're doing game design. Your average core rulebook coming in at around about, say, 250 to 400 pages, depending upon how expansive someone's decided to be, or if they're going for one of those nice, neat ones, still 120 pages or so. That's a lot of words. And then no one's happy with just a core rule book. So you need a starter set or splat book number 1, 2, 3, and 4, and a special little side bit for characters or whatever it might be for the RPG. It's a lot of work and it's a lot of continual writing, but it's one that I've done so much that I find almost like just a walk in the park. It's what are we doing with this one? Oh, exciting. Then the excitement builds, because if it doesn't excite me, I'm probably not going to do it. I get all super excited, work with the team, and we end up landing on what we want. Where board game design, much more iterative processing, particularly at the beginning, where you've got your core, let's say our core concept, the design that we're looking for, but the iteration of playing and also the iteration of conversation about what would make for the best, let's say, theme for that game, which might not be what you started with. It might be something new because you found that the way it's playing lands a different way or whatever. Loads of conversations around that. Iterative design, but the actual product, 1,000 times easier to write. So much fewer words. A rule book that often you're not trying to be expansive and inspire someone else to play in a world and to understand it so well that they can make it theirs. Instead, you're trying to be tighter so that they understand every rule. That's all that really matters. All the rest of it is potential color or whatever else you put in there. But tight rule writing, clean editing is super important on the board game side. So you tend to find that it actually crunches down smaller, where on the roleplay side, it often builds up bigger as you're building up different ways that people can interact with this world that you're attempting to present for them to present. One of the biggest issues I've seen with RPG design is writers coming in and wanting to tell their story. But that's not what you're there to do. You're there to allow someone else to tell their story at their table. So you're there to inspire, not necessarily to lead, depending upon how you put it. So yeah, they're very, very different processes. And I enjoy both of them for different reasons. And depending on what jobs I'm doing, depends upon exactly how much. I mean, I do war games as well. Xeogenesis, which recently popped up on GameFound, I think it was. They had been running around for a good few years, pre-production, before they'd reached the point of actual going. And I got brought in to get it done, reach the final points of the books being produced. And that was an enormously satisfying experience where we got to take everything that was there, pool it together and come up with a final war game that had been, all the parts were there, but they'd never been put together. So effectively coming in and organizing project management pipelines and getting everything into place. It was largely a project management job with loads of joy attached to it because it's about a game that everyone was having fun with, and ensuring that they had the right art in place, ensuring that they had an actual art direction. So there was very clear artistic design from A right through to Z in the books. It was good. Yeah, as I say, I do a good bit of everything.
I have a question on the way that you see that process. I imagine that you've been involved with so many, especially on the RPG and maybe wargame design, you've been involved with so many worlds. How do you still get excited about things? I would just imagine that if somebody came to you and said, "Oh, this is the story. It's a fantasy story," and then there are these spells that you can do, and start to like maybe try and explain to you the world that they're trying to develop. Exactly. So my question is, like, it seems like from known you now for a little while, and I think it's very interesting how you strike this balance between like rooting from joy, but also bringing in the business side of things in terms of how something needs to be structured, how it's going to be perceived, how it's going to sell. But at the same time, 200-page book you might be responsible for. Yeah. That there's only so much, yes, this is a job, let me push, that you can probably pull from, and there needs to be some sort of sense of wonder and excitement. And I would just wonder, how do you tap into that, A, and B, like, what do you find giggle inducing for you?
Interesting question. And some of my answers here are going to sound almost glib and simple, but
it's Gelb, actually.
Okay. I was close. They're going to sound almost Gelb and simple. Well, that seems an unfair connection.
It's accurate. It's incredibly accurate. Totally fine. It works out with all of us.
So I'm a game player. I love games. I've always loved games. And I have, since I was a kid, been involved with gaming one way or another. My parents were gamers and I was brought up in an environment in gaming. I don't just mean your Monopolies, they were role players as well. My parents' library of sci-fi and science fiction was big enough to be a library. And that's what I grew up with. I've been steeped in the classic mythos of gaming my entire life in one fashion or another. And that extends to all of the media I consume, whether it's movies or books or whatever it might be. These are the things I like. So to begin with, I'm already invested in the general area. And when I say invested, I'm pretty deeply invested. And I tend to find the thing that makes me most excited about any project is enthusiasm. And that may sound like a bit of a cop-out answer, but you find that when people are enthusiastically engaged with what they're creating, when they have this burn, this urge, this need to get it done, that's when you often get those pure gems coming out. The lovely pieces of whether it's gaming art or whether it's that lovely bit of game design because the person just like, yeah, this freaking rocks. When people get stuff that they're passionate about, you're far more likely to get something cool. Now, having said that, I've worked with a lot of people who are businessmen in the games industry who are doing it as a job, and they are by no means necessarily less likely to come out with something that is beautiful, that is wonderful, that is well polished, and importantly on deadline. All of those things, they're not mutually exclusive, but you tend to find when people are passionate about their project, it's much more likely that something's going to land out of it. At least so I've found. And I like working with people who are super excited about what they're doing, not super excited to just simply have that job. And because of that, I tend to find that the thing that gets me going when I'm speaking to someone is the passion that they're beginning to show about what it is that they're creating.
It's one of those weird things that has come from, of all places, I remember watching Dragon's Den about the idea of people giving someone else money for a product. They are never doing it for the product. They are doing it for the person. And I think that is noticeable throughout all board games as well. It is, that I've seen produced at least, that it is not that game that someone has made. It is always, oh, that is one of the games that person has made. They are making this game and this game and this game as well, or they are planning to keep going with it. It is that passion and that drive for an idea or a atmosphere or a world that they believe in that really kind of drives that.
A few points on that. In Rookery Publications, our art director, Mark Gibbons. Now, for anyone who doesn't know Mark, I'll give a brief introduction. Mark was an artist at Sony, at Games Workshop, at Riot Games. He's basically been running around the major studios most of his life, and he's reached that point in his life where he's like, I just want to do stuff for myself. And he is a perfect example of what I was talking about. Someone who is deeply passionate about the stuff that he's making. And if it doesn't get him buzzed, he doesn't want to make it. And that's something that I look for when I'm working with other people. If you can get that, you're winning.
Enthusiasm is obviously very important. There are, though, a lot of folks that might be very enthusiastic about something that isn't necessarily going to work.
Correct.
Or isn't necessarily there. You can make the argument there are no original stories, but maybe that it's not necessarily original enough, or differentiated enough. So I imagine people will come and try and talk to you about their worlds, and convince you, and they'll want to be saying something that suddenly sparks your excitement, right? And I know that may or may not happen on its own, but are there ever attributes of a good world that might, from on the surface, seem rather samey, that are actually quite, actually more unique from the point of attracting an attention like yours? Does that make sense?
So this actually spans back to a meeting I had the other day, which I'm not allowed to talk about. So I'm going to instead talk about what we talked about, so to speak. So let's just say in a sort of ephemeral, misty way that I was in a meeting once, and effectively this topic sort of came up, and the idea of what makes for a good setting where creativity is good against where creativity is just milling out the salt and pepper from the grinder and hoping for different crystals this time. But salt and pepper is all you're going to get. And I think the cleanest way to answer that would be that when somebody comes at you with something that feels fresh and original and they're enthusiastic, you know you're in a good place. But when somebody comes at you with the same things that have been done 100 times before and they're enthusiastic, you know that what they're creating is going to disappear. I mean, it's going to possibly be cool. They might make a polished version of it, but it's not something I'm going to be deeply excited by. And that, I think, could be easily given an example of. If you were creating yourself a new fantasy or sci-fi game, there's almost these classic tropes that people fall into when they go, well, I shall take this real world equivalent and make this. And the people who do that well are people who look at different cultures, different histories, and come up with something new and exciting from that, which are not that. The people who do it badly make space Vikings and fantasy Vikings. And then they go and make, you can just fill in all the blanks yourself. You know exactly the sort of things.
It's kind of like a samurai, but it's also kind of like a Viking. And it's, you know.
And when they are just copy pasting, it's not that interesting or exciting. This isn't a world that's going to make everybody go, yeah, I want to see more about this. But when they're doing something new and fresh, it absolutely, almost every time is, particularly when they're passionate and enthusiastic about it. And during that conversation, another point came up, which I thought was deeply, potentially difficult, which is, what do you do when you're slamming up against things like, particularly when you're creating worlds, cultural appropriation? And let's just quickly sum that all up with what everyone loves to call woke. And probably some of it is, but a bunch of it really isn't. And people have become afraid to create because of this. During a similar conversation, someone said that no white person's ever allowed to have dreads because of the cultural sensitivities that come from America in particular. Because of that, whilst his literal community that he came from wore dreads and had done throughout history. And he was left going, why can't I include this thing that I feel is mine in my work? And the answer is, you should be able to. And possibly there's a broader conversation, and possibly you need to be brave. But sometimes being brave is important. But equally, being exceedingly sensitive to all of the sensitivities is also important. There is, in the fantasy and sci-fi gaming industry, a large amount of, I'm not going to do this because I'm afraid of what will occur because of it. And it has become a stymieing point of creativity these days. And we end up with loads of bland worlds, all of which are using the same blancmange templates to create the same slightly different, I've got pointy ears, okay, my elves are actually downtrodden, or whatever it might be. They're just using the same cookie cutter templates for everything and then pushing it out and in the most bland, openly acceptable way they can. And I'm kind of bored of it now. When we were through our first spate of those games, it was good because they were attempting to be much more open and inclusive. But then open and inclusivity turned into censorship. And both are important for different reasons. But when everything is being created with censorship in mind, you end up with duller outcomes.
And do you think that a majority of these things are coming from someone who is trying to maneuver that culture that is attached, or something that is attached in the real world, to a fantasy or sci-fi or anything else world? Or have you seen some circumstances of someone doing something that is original and then other people who have seen that or come into it from just completely fresh and playtest and go, oh, well, this is obviously an allegory for this thing here and not what the person who created the game meant to do, but now something they have to be aware of?
Yes, and oh, hell yes. And let's just pull on examples that I can say clearly, because I can give specific examples. In Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, when that was getting put together, a lot of self-edits were put in that because there was fear of distancing certain right-wing elements. So there was a removal of gay references in places. And that's the opposite of what most people expect. Equally, there was a deep desire to be exceedingly more diverse in terms of the art, in terms of the overall appreciation of what your characters were. There was, when I came in, there was something like 5% of the art, 10% of the career art was female. So that needed to be turned to as much of parity as we possibly could have. But when that game was released, video beyond video online saying this is not what a realistic fantasy world should be, as if women somehow didn't interact with the world. And it's really interesting to see the push and pressure from both sides, because the online discourse has become so rabid on both sides, that most creators are now crunching into the middle in a desperate desire not to offend either side. And that has left us in a position where creatives are feeling like their arms are cut off and they're no longer being as creative as they could be.
Do periods like this allow for then trend changes as an opportunity to introduce certain changes? So I'm thinking of like, counterculture right now isn't very big. Superheroes.
That's not big.
No, but like new superheroes, like gritty superheroes. The kind of does it mean that maybe fantasy right now is a little bit too safe or woolly, and sci-fi
to
or something
a degree,
else?
but that safety is involves a lot of very important guardrails that are there for very good reasons. And it's very easy, if you're not careful, to accidentally not just jump over the guardrail, but to tear it out of the ground and start swinging it around all over the place and hurting people. Well, that's not the intention, because almost everybody I know in the industry are super cool. They're desperate to build the best stuff they can. And when they're editing out what they might consider to be material that's no longer perhaps something they should do, their self-censorship is often leading them in a place, because out of good intentions, in a place that's perhaps slightly weaker. I'll give you an example of someone who did it slightly differently. If you take a look over at Trench Crusade, which is a relatively new war game, a good couple of million sitting underneath its Kickstarter, they are, let's call it out for what it is, a bunch of white guys from Europe and America, and they have had the temerity to do a Muslim faction. That did not go down well with an enormous faction. Then they released it and everyone went, this is great. You can see the fear that sort of thing engenders in many game creators. And they would immediately go, I can't do this. I don't have the right voice. I don't have the right people. I can't do this. What if it comes out wrong? But they had the bravery to do their job, and they did it really well. Now, that doesn't mean they would necessarily have done it well, but bravery often comes out with far better results. They've ended up with a massive fan base that they would never have had because they had moved into an area that they thought should be done. Because Muslims' history, the history of that, it's just enormously enticing and rich and beautiful. And to not include it would have been weird. But the desire from most people who would have been in that sphere would have been, let's just avoid that and do something else. The classic example, if you look over at Games Workshop, where they're very happy dealing with the Northern European factions. But the second you go down towards, say, their equivalent of Arabia or their equivalent of Africa, they don't touch it. They just don't touch it. And you can see the safety lines that they've put in place. And it's unfortunate. All their games reference them. They all claim, they're there. We've got it. We're not bad. But the actual detail that they provided there is no longer done because they had a lot of mistakes they did in the past. And they don't want to repeat them. But that fear has also left them in a place where it's way too safe. They've ended up with a product that is much more interestingly bigoted, where white people can go, the white people I mean, this is our game. Look at all the models. They're all men and they're all me. Anyone else shouldn't be playing this game, which is why when you do something like Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, you do everything you can to undermine that sort of perspective. And you have people of color, you have women, and we got quite a lot of sensitivity readers to come in, particularly given how we were dealing with the gods, for example, because gods are by their nature in a polytheistic society and religion. They're often very gender agnostic, shall we say.
Or sometimes fluid.
Exactly. And we desperately wanted to give an idea of the gods that was much broader and felt polytheistic. So we reached out to several communities after we had finished the core writing of it. We reached out to a whole bunch of, at that point, it was Facebook groups because they were big at that point. And it was really interesting seeing some of the feedback where one of the trans groups came back and they were like, this is binary. You've made a binary. This all is binary. And we looked at it and we went, oh, they were right. Because you're blind to certain things that you write, which is why sensitivity reading is so important. And we did a lot of edits, shuffled things around a bit, did quite a few career changes as well. And that's not to placate an audience. That's to hit the design goal you're going for, when you're looking to create something that works inside that particular sphere. And you might find that you don't quite have the correct language to do that, or the background. You might think you do, and you might have done all the research, and you might think you've nailed it. We did, by the way. Absolutely convinced we'd nailed it. That was one of those ones where you send out, you were like, this is going to be great. And they're going to love this. And they're like, this is great. You've really tried. And you're like, uh-oh, they said the word tried. Uh-oh. But their notes were beautiful, and they were so delighted to be engaged. And then once we got the final product, they were beyond happy. And it was all down to just a single paragraph of text in the end. That's all. It was a quick discussion in that. We got it fixed and it was great. But yeah, there's dangers on both sides.
On a similar vein, but you as a player, right? You've been in this world so long, in this world of worlds.
Sure.
You've designed worlds. How do you keep things fresh when you are actually playing or GMing?
So I'm going to answer this question with a GM tip, which might not sound like the natural way of doing it, but I've been role-playing since I was knee-high to a Brussels sprout, pretty much almost from the beginning. My first role-play memories are with my own family, even role-playing with my grandmother. And keeping role-play fresh beyond just simply going from world to world to world to world. So thus it's different stories you're telling, different allegories, different core metaphors coming to the fore. If you're playing inside the same world and you've just got your own favorite one that you really like playing, it's really easy to get bored. And I will extend this further by saying you might just play a campaign, a long-term campaign that lasts for 2, 3, 4, 5 years. I played Vampire Chronicle, lasted 10 years. I played one Warhammer campaign that lasted 10 years. And that is a long time to play a single game with potentially a single set of characters. How do you keep it fresh? And the answer is, one, to begin with, play something you enjoy. So if you've got the fresh start that you really enjoy, you're in a safe space already. But as a GM, you've got to be a player. So by that, I mean, you can't know everything that's going to occur. If you know everything that's coming and you have fixed everything that's coming, it will become basically you telling stories, and that will become ultimately something you burn out on. So having a host of tools in place that ensure that you don't know what the outcome is going to be in a particular situation. There's lots of ways we can do this. The idea is more important than the specific answers. And I'll give you a specific answer so you can see what I mean by the idea. Say, for example, you had your characters going into a particular area and you knew an outside party were attempting to influence them. You could say, you've got 6 players, take 6 potential influences that come upon them, mix them up, and give them blind to the players. So you don't know which ones they're going to have as the GM, which means that as it unfolds, you've got as much mystery in the unfolding story as the players do. And that makes the game interesting. Immediately, you've got something different happening at the table, and you're kind of playing through it going, I wonder which one's got this, I wonder which one's got that. They're all doing the same. And if you're really clever in using, say, just that single secret mission tactic, so to speak, you could have a secondary one as well, which ties through to one of the primary ones, meaning that it might make them look like they're one of the others. And you can even turn that into a core component of the gamification of the roleplay at the table, where at the end they get rewards for doing certain things. If they manage to make everyone think they had someone else's mission, they get a reward. If the GM is fooled, they get a reward, whatever it might be. It's a game. You're there to have fun. So remembering to play the game and to not know what's going to happen as a GM keeps the interest going. And it also, as a GM and a games designer in particular on my front, it constantly has me coming up with new games and new ways that I can play at the table. Say, for example, a 10-year Warhammer campaign, which I did. I took a lot of inspiration from games like Final Fantasy, et al., roleplay games, computer games, in that they are aware that they've got 120 to maybe 200 hours of your time to take up. And if it's just encounter combat, you're going to get bored. So they have concepts of mini games that they use again and again, whether it's a mini card game, whether it's a skiing game going down a slope, whatever it might be for your characters to do to mix up the gameplay and keep you enthused with what you're playing. Exactly the same for the roleplay game on a long-term campaign. Bring in different systems, use different ways of play. We used, just to mention Dark Deeds, which we used Dark Deeds in our actual play as a method of determining how the different guilds were going to be reacting to certain things. So each player, through the course of their Dark Deeds game, was actually working for one of the guilds that were backstabbing the other guilds during the course of play. And at the end of it, whichever player won that was the guild that was in ascendance during the course of the actual play. And that's fun. It's using games in different ways. And that's how I personally keep my interest on something that is arguably the same topic for 10, 15 years. Yeah. Surely that sounds like it's going to be dull, where to me, it's just this open opportunity of different games, different ways to interact with each other, and most importantly for me, the unexpected uncertainty of what the players will do. Players are constantly inventive, doing stuff that you don't expect. One of my greatest GM tips to conclude on this one has always been, don't ever plan for how it's going to be. Plan for the session that you're about to do, and generally loosely, and don't worry, let the players have fun. Because if everyone's having fun and you don't know what's going to happen next, you'll also have much more fun. Roleplay is the king of wing it.
Yeah, completely. And it is built upon the idea of you have plans, and almost every game, they'll go somewhere else. I had one game where I played in a tavern with 5 different plot threads that could have come from the tavern, with them having to go and stop a king who was trying to kind of undermine the populace. And there was another one of like a dark cloaked figure in the corner, ranger style, who they could have talked to. You know what they did? They took over the tavern, and I spent the next 3 months running an economy game where they ran the tavern, tried to make sure that they paid enough taxes, get enough beer in and things like that. So they did that for 3 months. But then what happened was that a lot of those plot threads came back at them, where now the king had been dethroned and there was a massive revolt. So there was a huge amount of refugees coming into the thing, and that caused new story threads came from it, which of course I hadn't planned for. Of course I wasn't ready. When they asked me, how much does a cask of beer cost and how many do we need to get? It is that improvisation side of stuff, which always gave me a huge amount of joy with it. I find that endlessly engaging. Having something where you have a player you've told in secret of, oh, by the way, you know this information, where you have lied to them about it, or you have told them that information, and you tell every member of every player that you're with, oh, by the way, you are my secret agent in this. Don't tell any other player. And then they all think they have this unique thing, and then it comes up as a big thing at the end. Always been the biggest joy. I know a group who play a sci-fi RPG who every 6 months they change system. So they play the same characters, but they've played through Cyberpunk, they played through the Alien RPG, they have played through a whole bunch of other weird and wonderful things, including like Numenera and stuff, which is, I still find that really hard, the idea of transcribing a character, specific stats and things like that into an entirely different system. But for them, that keeps that really, really fresh to play with.
I actually, I've done that too. I've tried almost everything you can try with roleplay games, and still I'm looking for more. For example, we had one game which, let's just call it different dimensions, but each dimension used its own rule set. And that was super fun for translating characters from one to another as they took on different crunch, or they took on different traits, or they went to a far more storytelling system, because that's the nature of how that particular world worked. And that's fun. And things that mix things up are always fun. So yeah, I am deeply behind that. And as a second one, when I was, this is going back a bit, when I was demoing for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 2nd edition at Games Day, I took very much the idea that you were suggesting there, of that each one of them had their secret mission. But in that one, it was the classic story of vampire has kidnapped somebody, and you have to go rescue. But each one of them was then given their secret mission, like, you are actually a vampire thrall and you're there to undermine. You are actually a werewolf and you want to take out this. And it was probably one of the most fun games I'd ever had, because we had about 100 people watching, because it was at a tabletop event. They weren't used to role-playing games. And I'm loud and my voice projects. So they were all gathered round watching me tell this story and them interacting with the story. And everybody was expecting the classic heroic journey that you get in most roleplay games, where they're off to beat up the big bad vampire. And then at the end, one of them collapsing down on his knees and swearing eternal fealty because he wants to become a vampire. Another one literally trying to stab the other one in the back. One turning into a giant werewolf at the conclusion. Everybody's rolling around in laughter. And it was also a competitive game. That's not normal for a roleplay game, but if you survived it, you got so many points. If you meet your mission, you got so many points. If you had so many wounds left, you got so many points at the end. So some of them actually wanted to die because that was their mission. If they could get somebody to kill them without asking them to be killed. So they were throwing themselves in front of things. And the end was this big mess that I had no idea how it was going to turn out. Mm-hmm. And the players were each giggling like crazy because they had a ridiculous thing to do at the end. And the people watching were absolutely stunned at how this game was unfolding in a way that just seemed so entertaining. But what was the biggest point about that wasn't that game. It was when I ran it the second time, and it was so different that the same people who'd watched it first time were purposely turning up to watch it again to see how it be. I ran that game 4 times in total there. Every time we ended up with huge crowds because the first one had been so entertaining and the later ones were so different. And that's how you keep yourself engaged. You don't just tell a story that you know the outcome of. When you're GMing, you're telling stories that you don't know the outcome of, and thus you are also entertained by it. And that, I think, is a nice example that puts that down.
So I have a personal question.
Yes.
You've been attached to so many games. And I wonder if you can think through, if any of them jump to mind that maybe people might not have experienced, maybe they didn't do very well, or maybe they were only one run, but that you, while working on it or in your memory, was like, wow, that's a great game. That was a great game. I love being attached to that. I know all of them are bestsellers. However,
no, it's not that.
But are there a couple that wistfully come to mind when you're like that?
There are loads of games like that, but they're typically the games that I wasn't involved with, that I saw, thought that's a lovely idea. I'll pick that up on a Kickstarter or something similar. And it disappears and you never see it again. And we know just how big the games industry has become in the last 5-10 years in comparison to what it was in the 5 or 10 before that. Where, say, a Kickstarter 10-15 years ago, you were that shining gem amongst a handful of others. Where now if you're in retail today trying to stock every game, there are thousands of new codes hitting every month, thousands of new products, whether it's just the expansion or the little extra dice or the big new game or whatever it might be. It's impossible to stand out, meaning that I don't really like picking out and choosing individuals because most of them are dead games now. All of these great little games. I really enjoyed the Night Witches roleplay game. I thought it was really quite pretty.
Oh, yeah. Jason Morningstar.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, fantastic.
That was a fantastic little idea. Fantastic, neatly encapsulated little game. I really like that. And I could probably do this all afternoon because there's so many little games that I was like, oh, I really like that idea. I really like what they were attempting to do with that one. The Hen Commandments was a stupid board game where you were making up your own religions around chickens. There's all manner of different games out there that bring great to the table, but it's really hard to find them nowadays. And that's really the point I'm going to make in that one. It's a very competitive industry today, and the great games often just vanish.
Yeah, it's we always talk about the Kickstarter games, the highest or most amount of money that Kickstarter games make last year, the top 20, every single one of them was a second or third game by someone who had already done well on Kickstarter. It is really hard to find those unique, original things. But when you do, I will shout from the rooftops about it as much as possible. And I will personally try and get them into the shop because I like being able to talk about games I love as well. Isn't
that what it's all about? And I find myself in this weird, sad place now where I've kind of stopped buying because it's too hard, there's too much. And that's not really where I like to be. I like experiencing new games. I like trying out new stuff. I've got about 500-600 of them in my house at least. I could run a shop with just what I've got in my house. Miniature-wise, I have a pile of shame that probably is larger than the Eiffel Tower. It's so ridiculous. I have so much of everything just sort of stacked away in my house, often not getting played. And that's unfortunate. I much prefer getting stuck in, but I still use all of those games because I'm role playing every week still. I've got my actual play Lawhammer where I'm doing a Warhammer game every week, and I'm using bits and pieces from all of those games all the time. And because I'm also someone who can make any map that I need, make any illustration that I need, I can just slam out a big map that I've literally made myself the night before, got it printed in the local print shop, and then using bits from all the various games that I've got, create an entirely new game. We've had an entire Dungeon Bash special card rotation game that got used just for a single episode, did the whole full rules, dropped that online. We had a fantasy equivalent of Space Hulk, if you know the Space Hulk game. We did a fantasy version, which was all about going through the tunnels underneath one of the cities in Warhammer. And adding all of those games into my game means that at least I'm still getting some use out of them, but I've kind of stopped buying now because I've got so much and I kind of feel sad about it.
Well, but you do have so much, which is a wonderful thing to be able to go back to. That is amazing. Thank you so much for joining us, Andy. If people want to hear more of your voice or see you in a physical form on a screen, Or if you would like to just tell us about other things you're doing, where's the best place that they can find you?
Oh, so many places. All right, so let's start off with the bigger ones. I stream almost every week with Inside the Rookery, which is a weekly podcast with people from across the games industry. We chat for an hour about whatever it is that they're doing or whatever they particularly enjoy. And it's an informal chat where anyone who watches can actually type in a question and live ask it to whoever it happens to be that we have on, which is always fun. Gelb's been there. Yes. It was great.
It was great.
You should come too. So I do that. I do an actual play every Friday of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, the game I designed, and I've torn it apart and made an entirely new version for our game, all of which is up on our Patreon because I can't help myself. It's all available for free. I don't gatekeep all the rules we make. I gatekeep all the stupid stuff that we have behind the scenes because, hey, it's good to be able to afford a new microphone. So we do that every week and it's enormous fun. We're currently playing the Enemy Within campaign, Warhammer's most famous campaign, in fact, one of the most famous campaigns ever written. But let's just say it's a very modified version of that. As I said, we had an entire Dungeon Bash game just slotted in Space Hulk stroke fantasy. Lots of cool stuff through the course of that one. I also stream with Lorebeards, which is a podcast on 2 channels about Warhammer background. And we do 3-hour shows like 2 times a week, discussing things inside Warhammer and going in depth into all their background because I happen to have written large chunks of it and I also know lots of it. And that's often facing the Total War crowd, if you know Warhammer Total War, because a lot of them, they just know the peaks, not the troughs of the lore. And we go down into the deep valleys of the lore rather than just sitting at the top of the peaks saying it's these troops doing this sort of thing. That's super fun. And beyond that, just check out Rookery, Lawhammer online. You'll find me somewhere. We've got pretty big Discord channels too, which is nice.
Absolutely amazing. Thank you again, Andy. As always, I have been Dougal.
Big Gelb.
And this has been edited by Ryan Scott. Thank you all for joining us.